Hi there, welcome to Floating in Dreams. Today's video is going to be a tea time chat about makeup in the Netherlands. Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. I thought I could do a tea time chat all about makeup in the Netherlands because I always get questions, and I know there are some like internationally known creators like a Nikki Tutorials, who is known for her full glam highlighter kind of look. And I think that if people aren't from the Netherlands, that it can be a little skewing to think that that's what everybody looks like and that makeup in the Netherlands is like every other place. So I just thought it would be fun to do a tea time chat and sort of talk about how like different countries, different cultures just have a different viewpoint on what makeup is and how it is used. And I think that within the Netherlands, that also goes into what we can then purchase, and that also goes into like my channel and how I run things. So that's sort of what I want to cover today. So I hope you'd like to stay tuned for more and let me know in a comment down below what makeup shopping is like in your country. I would love to know. Before we get into the video though, I would like to welcome you. I'm very glad to have you here. My name is Maaike. I live in the Netherlands. I have fair skin with a cool to neutral undertone, and this greatly influences how I feel about makeup and all of my preferences. I've been reviewing makeup for more than a decade. I love eyeshadow palettes, essence and Catrice, and getting the use out of my makeup. So thank you very much for joining me. Let's get into the tea time chat. So it's a little hot to be drinking tea today. It is absolutely boiling hot this week in the Netherlands. And I'm just gonna kick things off straight away that wearing something like this, like I am today, is already a lot of makeup for a lot of people within the Netherlands. Like if you just walk along a street, like a shopping street in the middle of a busy city, you're not going to see a whole lot of like full glam makeup. Some like younger generations do, like you can definitely see some of the TikTok and Instagram trends if you look at like teenagers and the people who are in their early 20s. But for the most part, I think that what a lot of people don't realize is that makeup is just not really a thing in the Netherlands. It just isn't. And I think that especially if the only Dutch person you know is Nikki Tutorials and me, then you might think, oh, but in the Netherlands everybody's wearing makeup. We have makeup in stores. People do wear makeup. But in the Netherlands, we have a saying, which in Dutch is, doe maar gewoon, dan doe je al gek genoeg. Which roughly translates into English as being just act or be normal because that is crazy enough. That's a literal translation. Whereas, you know, any sort of excess or outgoingness or outspokenness is something that within Dutch culture is a little bit frowned upon, like standing out from the crowd and like doing your own thing. Very often, like traditionally Dutch culture is very sort of like not trying to do too much, not trying to stand out, not trying to be noticed, you could say. And the minute you wear something like a bright lip, you will stand out because hardly anybody wears it. Like if I look at, you know, the places I've worked at and what students are wearing, what colleagues are wearing, like people around me, and if I just walk down the street, I stand out because I wear bright, colorful lipstick, I wear bright, colorful clothing, and that's just not the thing. Like in the Netherlands, it's like everybody wears navy, black, and white, and brown, and maybe a bit of beige. But that's about it. And when it comes to makeup, most people who do wear a little bit of makeup don't go past a bit of concealer and a mascara, maybe a bit of brow product. But eyeshadow, blush, bright colored lipsticks, it's just not really something you see everywhere you go. Like I feel you do when you go to other cities. Like if I've traveled, I see people wearing like really outspoken outfits, and of course it's different in all countries. I'm generalizing here, I'm very well aware, but makeup in the Netherlands, it's more like a tool to make yourself look more awake rather than like a form of self-expression. And of course within different groups of people that's definitely still a thing, but it's not the norm. It's not like this thing you see everywhere. I remember that was really like a shock when I first really went to like concerts in the UK, like what clubbing people wear, and it's like, wow, like back in my clubbing days, like nobody wore makeup. Like it just wasn't a thing. And then, you know, you go to England and everybody's wearing fake lashes and you're like, oh wait, what's that? And you know, you see different trends coming and going for sure as well. But I think that because of the internet and beauty blogs and beauty influencers, and definitely also people like Nikki Tutorials, who are also famous here, of course, there is slowly but surely coming more of an interest for makeup and for more colorful things and for more creative things, rather than the very sort of like pragmatic, I just need a bit of concealer to cover my dark circles and a lick of mascara and I'm out the door kind of situation. The Netherlands is definitely a country where a lot of people ride bikes no matter the weather. So that I think that that's also something that a lot of people, if they're not from the Netherlands, are always a bit like, oh, well, you guys, what? If it's raining, even if it's raining, yeah, you just put on a rain suit and you go. So I think that, you know, some people will also ask me this sometimes in the comments. Is it because of the weather that Dutch women don't wear a lot of makeup? But I don't think it's necessarily the weather that has to do with it. I think it's a factor. Like, I definitely think it factors into it, but it's more this cultural idea of pure pragmatism. If there's anything, if I have to assign one word to the Dutch in a single word, it's pragmatism. It's being pragmatic. And like, if it doesn't have a function, it needs to go. And makeup can be seen as something that's very frivolous and sort of like this extra thing that you don't really need. But in the Netherlands, a lot of people are like, okay, if it doesn't function, it doesn't matter. And I think that that's definitely sort of like deeply ingrained in all of our brains, that this whole like makeup-y thing just isn't really something that we adhere to. So that's a bit of background about the Netherlands and how we sort of work and why makeup isn't really a thing, but that I do start to notice like a little bit of a change. But I definitely think that for most Dutch people, it's just a practical thing, like rather than like, ooh, I want to wear this very nice bright red lipstick. Oh well. But yeah, because this whole thing, this focus on, you know, outer self-expression isn't as much focused on, I definitely think that we've been skipped by a lot of companies as well. We are part of the European Union, so that definitely goes into it as well. Not everything can be sold here because of European laws as well. Certain laws brands just need to adhere to, which is why I always think that we have fewer actual indie brands, because I think that within the EU, the standards you need to adhere to be able to run a makeup brand, and like the amount of quality control that needs to go into it before you can really start the business takes much more money and input than it does in the US. In the US, it seems to be like if you have enough money, you just buy the formula from somewhere and then you can start shipping things out to people. Whereas here, I feel there just goes more into it. There's a higher level of control. It's not always better. I'm not saying it's better, but I just think that that's why we have fewer makeup brands, and the brands we have are usually very well established. I mean, think of things like Dior and Chanel and these kind of like luxury brands that we all know about. They're all European brands. So I also just think that there's like a level of market saturation that it's also very difficult to get your foot into the market and to get started and to to chip away market share from these very well established brands that have been around for decades sometimes. So I definitely think that that goes into it as well. Like, our laws and legislation is just very different from other places, and that's why certain things aren't happening as quickly as they do in other places. But yeah, I think that, for instance, if you look at, what is an offer in our drugstores, I already notice this if I go to Germany, or if I go to, which is also in the EU, of course, but if I go to the UK, and if I go to the US, it's even worse, where you just have these giant stores where it's aisle upon aisle upon aisle of makeup, And we don't have that. Like, we don't, it's just not a thing. And if you go to, you know, one of the biggest stores, like drugstores I have access to, that's what you find in like a small city Target. And like, it's like a third of what you'd find there if you go to like the US or if you go to the UK. Of course, you know, you have these really tiny booths and they only have one thing. But if you go to one that's generally well stocked, I think that very often in like, especially in places like Germany, France, like they're just bigger markets. And there's a lot more floor space for things available as well, than what we are offered here. So less floor space. I mean, the Netherlands is a tiny, tiny, tiny country. So every square meter is sort of like written down and divided up, and can you do something with this and what you can do with it. It's all regulated. And I think that that's also that goes into like city centers having smaller stores, and like these big giant Zaras that you see in Italy or France, you just don't have them here. Like we have a big Zara in Rotterdam city center, but it's nowhere near as big as some of the Zaras I've been to in other places. So I definitely think that goes into it as well. Like the fact that we are such a small market means we as a country are less marketable. And what you see happening very often is that brands want to sell their product as much as they can. So they'll very often launch in bigger territories, a France, a Germany, Spain, Italy are bigger markets as well, the UK for sure as well, for two reasons. A, they are bigger markets, like the size of it is just bigger, so you have a larger customer potential for buying things. And the Netherlands like teeny tiny compared to that. But there's also more of a focus like on wearing makeup, like, you know, the classic French red lip, that sort of thing. And when you go around like an average city in Italy, you see nearly everybody wearing makeup that's a little bit more obvious than it is here. Like here, it's like you wear makeup, but nobody can know you're wearing makeup, which is a distinction, you know? So in the Netherlands, I always hear people saying this, like, oh, so many people complimented me on the makeup I was wearing that day. In the Netherlands, you don't do those kind of compliments because then it means that people can see that you're wearing makeup, and that's not the aim. Like the aim is to have it be undetectable. So if people can see you're wearing makeup and they start complimenting you, then you know you've done something wrong, kind of idea. So I think that those two elements, just being smaller as a country and B, not having a lot of people who actually actively buy makeup, say for a bit of concealer and mascara, as I mentioned, there just isn't enough incentive for brands to, you know, get a foot in the door and to start selling their products here. If they sell products in the Netherlands, it's usually because they are part of or being stocked by companies that are part of a larger network of stores. So there's like a German version of Sephora, you could say. They're called Douglas, and they are one of the largest makeup chain stores here in the Netherlands as well. But you tend to see that some of the brands that are then first stocked in Germany slowly make their way to the stores over here as well. So that definitely goes into it. I think that also went for Urban Decay. Like they just had like a European branch that stocked things in different countries, but then, you know, when something doesn't do well enough, everything was pulled at the same time from all of those countries because they weren't selling enough product, and then the Netherlands gets scrapped really, really easily because we're just not big enough. We're not more important enough to have an impact on the, you know, the bottom line of these companies. We're sort of an afterthought because of it. We're not the big money makers. And this definitely went into Sephora. We used to have Sephora. I know, shocker on the used to have, right? So I think it was around 2011, 2012. It was like very early on in my makeup journey. And they were this shop-in-shop, a bit like they used to have in the US with JCPenney's. That sort of idea, that concept where they were part of a larger department store floor. So V&A, no longer exist because they went bankrupt, was a store, and select ones had a Sephora. And by having Sephora and V&A, we suddenly had access to Urban Decay, to NARS, to Makeup Forever, to Too Faced. And I was like, oh, like, you know, all of a sudden I could buy the Too Faced Shadow Insurance and pick it up from a shelf. And I remember going out of my way, because I think one of the first ones opened in Utrecht, and then we got one in Breda, and I think we had one in The Hague. And so I would like go to these places. I remember going to The Hague for MAC, I think it was part of Beiges at the time, because there was no MAC in the city I lived in. So I would travel to different cities in the Netherlands just so I could get my hands on certain makeup products. And from time to time, I would take a trip to The Hague to go to Lush, to go to MAC, and to find some other things, and to go to Sephora as well. And then I think they only were around for like a year or two, maybe 3 years. And then they left because they weren't making enough money. And the company that they were a part of, so V&A, who like rented their floor space to Sephora to have them in there, I think wanted to have more rent. And then Sephora was like, no, we would not be able to break even. It's much easier for us to open more stores up in Asia and focus on the Asian market rather than trying to continue this Dutch venture. So they pulled themselves out of the Dutch market completely. And that was actually also in my brain anyways. I'm not sure if this is right. I'm not a fiscal expert at all. But this was also the beginning of the end for the V&A stores, because I think Sephora pulling out was like a first sign that V&A wasn't doing very well. And they were actually, you know, part of this whole like venture capital kind of scheme, and then they could no longer pay rent, and some of the stores were doing well, whereas other stores weren't doing very well. The one very close to my house in Leiden, where I used to live, there was one across from where I lived, that was actually one of the best ones, you could say. It was always busy in there, and they were doing really well, but it was just like some of the bigger stores that they had were dragging the rest down, and then they went under, I think already in 2016 or something, like just a couple of years after Sephora left, they were done. They were completely done for. And I do remember they had just refurbished that store near my house. And I think 6 months later, they pulled the plug. But yeah, in my brain, this like Sephora leaving the Netherlands thing is something that's definitely contributed to the downfall of that other store as well. And yeah, I think that's a very good example of how makeup in the Netherlands it's just not where the money is made for brands, and therefore they make other choices. So, you know, we still don't have Fenty Beauty, we don't have Natasha Denona. So many of the raved about brands we don't get. Like, we don't get them in stores, we don't get them on a single Dutch website. I have to shop from EU retailers, so a Sephora, a Cult Beauty, a Beauty Bay, like these like big websites that have loads of brands on them. That's what I need to shop through in order to be able to get my hands on things very often. So I think that if you have access, especially to US Sephora, even if you don't live anywhere near to a Sephora, because I know some people need to drive hours to get to one, depending on where you live. But you know, you could buy things online at least. I can't even do that with a lot of things. So if it's from outside of European Union, it not only just gets expensive, but there are certain brands that don't ship to continental Europe, I think because of legislation, and the brands are just not getting the go-ahead to be able to being sold here, or they just don't sell things here because we're just not interesting enough in terms of making money for them. And that's also why, some of you know this, but I've been trying to put together a video for you guys with Dutch makeup brands. But there are no true Dutch makeup brands. This may sound really strange. I've gotten some requests from people to talk about Alice Vaas. And Alice Vaas was a Dutch designer. And there is a makeup line out there with her name on it. It's not a Dutch brand. The entire website is in English and all of the pricing is in dollars, and you don't even have the option to switch it to European, to a euro. So I think most of her career she lived in the US as well. So even though she was born and raised in the Netherlands, the brand really isn't Dutch at all. So don't think that just because a Dutch person is attached to it, that makes something a Dutch brand. I actually feel that way about quite a few brands actually, where I'm like, just because they say they're located somewhere doesn't mean they actually are. So yeah, I'm gonna try and focus when I put that video together to focus on some products that I've been very interested in trying myself. So we have a couple of drugstores in the Netherlands that have name brand makeup. I'm not entirely sure where it's made. I think it's China. But Kruidvat has a line, and I've swatched some things in stores and everything looks and feels wonderful. Like it seems to be a very solid drugstore makeup line. Hema is another one. I've tried some things from them. They can be very hit or miss. And when I think Hema, I think of anyone who was around in the 90s will remember. I'll pop a picture up on the screen for people who don't know what I'm talking about. But they used to have a line at Hema called Miss Helen. All the makeup at Hema was labeled Miss Helen. And they had these little trios of, I think they did lip glosses in some and like a cream shadow in others. I had some of those for like back when I was in high school. And it really, really takes me back. They were terrible though. They creased really badly. But yeah, I've tried one of their skin tints from one of their more recent ranges, and I love those. And till this day, I still have a couple of Hema brushes in my everyday makeup bag that I use on a day-to-day basis. So Hema has always been like my recommendation if you're in the Netherlands and you're looking for decent brushes that get the job done. And I've actually seen they've recently, I think in the past year or two, renewed their entire brush line. So I thought maybe you can buy some brushes from Hema and then a full face with most of the Catrice or the Kruidvat makeup stuff. And then I can do a full face makeup look that way. That's sort of the plan. People have been asking about Etels as well. So that's another drugstore we have here. But the Etels name brand makeup line, I personally haven't had really good experiences with. I've tried one of their contour powders in the past. I remember having some eyeshadow, lipsticks, a blush as well at some point. And nothing has ever wowed me to the point where I was like, oh, I need to keep this for the rest of my life. So Etels makeup, their nail polishes are nice. Like their nail care line is one of the best ones I feel at the Dutch drugstore. I've always used a lot of Etels nail care stuff. So I would go to Kruidvat for the makeup and Etels for the nail stuff. That's the way I did it. And then Hema for brushes. But other than that, Ici Paris, which is our you have Douglas and Ici Paris, and they are both like these more high-end luxury makeup stores that also do a lot of perfumes. But I feel within the Netherlands, the spiel, the thing that sells better than makeup is fragrance. So a third, maybe 2/3 of the store is dedicated to fragrance, and like makeup is like tucked away in a corner, even in a fairly big city where I live, like Rotterdam. But they do, both Douglas and Ici Paris have a name brand or in-store only sort of makeup line, and whenever I've swatched things from them, I've never been impressed. So I've tried some Douglas eyeshadow in the past actually, and that was decent, but very expensive for what you get, I feel. And then I think Ici Paris, do they still do Be Creative, or has it changed names now? Because they change the name of the brand every couple of years, but the quality has never changed, I feel. But yeah, those are some of their compared to the Diors and the Chanels and the Lancomes that they usually sell, it is more affordable, but I feel it's still quite expensive if you compare it to some of the things that Essence and Catrice do and what they do very well. Any other brands that I need to mention here? I don't think so. Like, that's pretty much it in terms of like makeup brands that I don't think you can buy anywhere else. Everything else we have here, like every makeup store you will walk into will have your Dior, YSL, Chanel, and that's Estee Lauder. That's like everywhere. Those are the 4 brands you can buy everywhere, and then you need to go to certain stores to find MAC or Bobbi Brown. There are different brands at different locations usually. The bigger the location, the more likely you are to find it. And since the Netherlands, Amsterdam is the capital of the city, of course, or of the country, of course, is our capital city. And very often that's where you will find some other brands as well. So if a new brand launches within the Netherlands, Amsterdam usually gets it first. And to be quite fair, I used to always travel back when I lived in Leiden. I loved to travel to Amsterdam, to The Hague, to Rotterdam, to Utrecht, to go shopping and to do all that. But now that I live in Rotterdam and I have like 95% of the things I'm looking for right on my doorstep, I feel less inclined to go to other cities within the Netherlands to try and find things. So I'm now more of a I'll go to Paris kind of I'm more in that sort of situation, because whether I travel to like the other side of the country or whether I take a train to Paris, it's shorter to go to Paris because it's a high-speed train. And cost-wise, getting a train ticket is about as expensive, I think. I think within the Netherlands it will be cheaper, but I think you'd get to roughly the same amount if I didn't have a discount card. So yeah, I'm currently not really inclined to be going to other places, save for when I'm traveling to an actual other country to try and hunt down makeup. And then I'd rather go to London or to Paris to actually be able to find these brands. Like, you know, when I was in London, I finally found Jones Road, which had been in the back of my head as a brand to try. And I'd looked them up, but the official website wasn't shipping to the Netherlands. And I was like, oh, well, I'll find it at some point. Maybe if I take a trip to New York in a couple of years, I might be able to find the brand and I can still buy it. And then I found it at Liberty and I was like, yay, Jones Road. So I'd rather do it like that and then really being able to try things. And a lot of things can be bought online nowadays as well. So that's why I'm more of an online shopper. But it can be challenging, you know, finding your shade match in a foundation. Oh, let's not even go there. I've had so many struggles with foundations here in the Netherlands especially. So I will be able to find online that a brand sells a certain shade range, and then I go to the Dutch store or I go to the Dutch online store, and then we only get half the shades. This is especially the case with drugstore. It's improved in recent years, but I remember having to go to the UK to find the lightest shades in Rimmel, L'Oreal, and Maybelline foundations because they weren't stocked here at all. Like, not online, nowhere where you would look. They would have the lightest or the deepest shades in the shade range, and I've always found that like I can understand a brand not really physically being available here because we are such a small market, but the brands that we do get also don't stock their entire collection in our stores. And I've always found that the most irksome. For instance, the Dior concealer that I have, there is a lighter shade available, but I can't for the life of me find it within the Netherlands. So, you know, whatever, YSL foundation that I wanted to try the Touche Claw one that was revamped a couple of years ago. And I had bought a shade online, which based on swatches looked like it was going to work for me. But then I got the bottle home and it looked so dark that I was like, I don't know if I can put this on. And the thing is, in the Netherlands, once you've opened the product and you've pumped product out, you're not allowed to return it. So I couldn't test it. So I was like, you know what? I'll take my bottle of foundation with me to the store. If they have, if they have the foundation in store, I'm sure they'll have a tester and I can at least test it. Turns out they didn't stock all of, this is YSL, luxury makeup brand. Not all of the shades they had on the website were available in store. In fact, the color chart on the little display, on the actual display in store, didn't have my shade on it. So when the store clerk was looking for the shade, she's like, "This shade of foundation doesn't exist." I'm like, "What am I holding in my hand? It does. It's on your website, and I want to try a tester." Because I don't want to open this 50 euro foundation without knowing whether the shade is right for me. Like, "Yeah, we can't help you here." It's like, "Can I return it?" No, you can't, because you bought it online, and online purchases and in-store purchases are two separate revenue streams, so you're going to have to go through our online customer service. And I was like, can we make it even more complicated for shoppers? Like, I was so pissed off. I was like, at least have all of the testers in store so people can, Essence and Catrice do this as well, They'll have like a 15 shade range, and then they stock 5 in store, and they are claiming it's due to space, but you can't also test it because they won't have the testers. And I'm like, how are people going to be able to figure out what their shade is going to be if you do offer more shades than what you can't find in store? So I ended up taking the guess with that YSL foundation, and I opened the bottle and I used it, and it turned out that it shears out. When you shear it out on the back of your hand, it actually lightens. So I have two foundations by YSL, the All Hours. It's an older version, not the renewed one that they came out with last year, or I think this year actually. But I have that one, the All Hours, and the Touche Éclat, and I bought it in the same shade number, and the All Hours looks super duper Snow White pale in the bottle, and the Touche Éclat looks super duper tan. But for some reason, when I swatch them on the back of my hand, they are the same shade. Because the All Hours oxidizes a little bit, and the Touche Éclat actually lightens when you shear it out. This is why you need to test products, and you need to be able to find testers, which is why it's sometimes such a big pet peeve of mine. And if you've ever watched any of my new makeup releases and you've heard me say, I would want to test this out in store first, or I want to see this in real life, because so few brands are available to me, I very often have to wait weeks, sometimes months, for me to be able to see a product in real life and really know, like, okay, is this okay? So currently I feel this way about the I Need a Nude from Natasha Denona. Everybody wanted to know my opinion, but I cannot physically see this palette unless I go to France. Like, that's another country. I know that for some people, especially if you are in the US, you're like, oh, that's just 5 hours away. That's super close by. For some Americans, that means they haven't even left their state. But within Europe, I have to cross 2 borders. Like, we now have a trade union, so there are no borders anymore. But I remember in the 90s that we had to show our passport at the Belgium border because we wanted to go to Belgium, like before we had this whole thing going on. I still remember that. Yeah, I still remember not having a euro. I used to pay in guilders. I was paid, my first job ever paid me in guilders rather than euros. So I still know what the concept is of a Belgian and a French franc. So in my brain, going to Paris, very different people, very different language, very different culture. That's a much bigger change of environment than you driving 5 hours in your US state. Like, I always find this so funny when you talk to Americans, or when Americans are making content about Europe, because for Americans, Europe is like the US, like all the countries are like states, but they don't view it as actual countries, and they talk about Europe as if we're one country. But that's not how it works. Like, there used to be actual borders until 25 years ago, everywhere you went. And it's made travel a lot easier. It's made working a lot easier. It's made so many things a lot easier. So I think we're not going to get rid of that. But please don't tell people who live in Europe that they live in one country, because there's a huge difference. And there's a lot of differences between people from different countries. And I think anyone who is from a European country can attest to this, that the differences between you and the people who live in the next town over are so incredibly noticeable already. And I don't know why that is, but that's the way we feel about it. So even though Paris is only like a 2.5 hour train ride away, it's about a 5-hour drive, but 2.5 hours on high-speed train. You're really setting foot in a completely different world. And it's like going on vacation. You know, it feels like going on vacation because you are going to such a different environment. Even if it just go for a day. Whenever I've been to Paris for a day, which I know to some people sounds really strange, but yeah, it's doable for me. I live in a city that has a train station where the high-speed train has a stop. So I can get on at like 7 a.m. in the morning. I'm in Paris around 9:30, and I can catch a train back home at like 7:30 at night, and I'm back by 10 p.m. It's wonderful. It works really well. You've been away, and it really feels like because I've been to a completely different country where people speak a different language, where the food is different and the pace of living is different. I've really been away. It's like a one-day mini recharge vacation. But it works a little bit differently than just going like taking your car and driving somewhere in the US. It's a very different concept. We just have a very different sense of distance and time within the European Union, I think. And especially in the Netherlands. I remember back when I lived in Leiden and I worked in a town called Breda. That's like an hour to an hour and a half journey one way. And that is far for Dutch people. That's like, if you tell them that you're traveling 3 hours a day just to get to and from work, they're like, wait, what? And for Americans, it's like, oh, an hour into work? I do that every single day. And I know in places like the UK and Germany and France, distances can be that far away as well. But within the Netherlands, I think that idea of distance and the time you travel, because we are such a small country, is even like amplified compared to other countries around us because we are so small. I mean, I think to like circle the entire country takes you 5 hours, and then you've left the Netherlands. Like just going across it, I went to Oberhausen this summer. It was a 2-hour journey, and I was in Germany. But then I'm in a completely different country, and I need to try my best at speaking a completely different language. I speak this much French and this much German, just in case you were wondering. Just because I had it in high school, but I can't really speak it. I can make myself understood, sort of, but I don't have the vocabulary and like I don't have the fluency that I have like I do in English. But like I can ask for a cup of coffee, or I can order a meal and ask for directions. You know, your very basic A1, A2 level stuff that I can do in like French and German. But I wouldn't be able to do this kind of video in German or French, so please don't ask. So yeah, I definitely think that goes into it as well. So just the concept, like, oh, but it's easy for you to go to Paris. And I think that some Americans would be like, oh, I would do that every single week. The reason why I don't do it every single week is because there's just a very different mental strain that goes into, for me, going to Paris. It just does. It's like, oh, I'm going to a completely different country. Like, I think for Americans, it would be more like you were crossing the border to Mexico or Canada. It's that level of intensity that you experience then. Yes, it's easy. It's easier here to travel from country to country, but that's because the countries are just closer together. But they are different countries. They're not states. It's not like over there. Okay. Rant over. But yeah, makeup in the Netherlands, it's definitely a thing. And I've always like jokingly said how the Netherlands is like a makeup desert. And yes, there is makeup around, but a lot of the new exciting stuff that we see online doesn't happen here. Doesn't happen here. Luckily, there is this thing called the internet, and I can buy a lot online, so that's what I do, because, you know, I want to try things. But even like the Essence and Catrice stuff, I try. A lot of it I actually order from Germany. There are some German websites that ship to my location, so if I can't get it from Boozy Shop, which is the Dutch website I use for that, because they have next day delivery, so I usually hope that they will have everything in stock. But for the past 2 releases from Essence and Catrice, like this round that I've done videos with this month and last month, there was just no stock. So I had to place an order on Cosmetic for Less to try and get them in. So yeah, that's a little bit about the Netherlands, makeup in the Netherlands. And I towards the end there, I really started going on about how like the idea of living in Europe is a little bit differently compared to other places, I think. People are surprised how close things are together usually. I was very, like, there was a TikTok I saw the other day where some American, I think they were American or from the UK, I don't remember, but they were native speakers of English who were saying that the Efteling, which is the largest theme park of the Netherlands, was close to Amsterdam. To a Dutch person, it's just not close to Amsterdam. So yeah, we have a very different idea of concept of like time and space and how that translates into travel. I think that definitely goes into it. But yeah, that also goes into how we feel about makeup and why makeup isn't such a thing. It's a cultural thing, but it also has to do with the fact that we're just not the most interesting market for brands to be stocking things here. There's just no money to be made. And that's why we don't get all of the releases, and the things we do get are either late or incomplete. So yeah, I really have to go online and source anything simply for that reason. So I'm used to it. I know I'm gonna have to pay for shipping and handling fees, and so that's what I tend to do. So yeah, thank you so very much for joining me. I hope this wasn't too rambly for you, but I still hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in a comment down below what makeup shopping looks like in your country. I would love to know, because I know a lot of people are watching me from like very different countries to where I live. So I would be very curious to see how that works for you. So I'm very happy that you were here today. Thumbs up the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more by me. I make a tea time chat every single month, and I like to sort of give my saucy, ranty thoughts about several makeup topics, and we'll tackle a new one next month. So if you have any suggestions of topics you would like to see me tackle, then definitely let me know in a comment down below as well. And for now, I would like to thank you so very much for being here. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more by me, and I hope to see you again in my next video. Bye-bye!